Hi friends, hi everyone. In this session, I'll be discussing about the topic bioequivalence, right? Bioequivalence. So let us understand what do you mean by bioequivalence? It's written that two pharmaceutically equivalent companies with a similar rate, time taken for absorption, and extent of absorption, amount of drug absorbed, it is required for drug manufacturing companies. And you should also understand there is something known as branded drug and the generic drug. So what is it trying to tell us? Now, I have I have invented a tablet, right? I myself had invented tablet for the say example, you have gotten paracetamol, okay, for the fever, right? Fever. Branded drug is one which is invented and patent for 20 years. So what I did is, now I have invented a drug, right? I have invented drug and that has cured the fever. Once I invent the drug for the disease, I have a patent for 20 years. Okay, that means for the 20 years, nobody has authority to copy my formula and recreate the drug for the fever, right? The composition of the paracetamol should not be copied for the 20 years. Now, what do you mean by generic drug? Later, after 20 years, what happens here is legal copy of a drug done after patent expires. Right? Now, after 20 years, what happens here is, right, since now the branded drug, say example, one tablet cost around 100 rupees, right? If it cost about 100 rupees, since the 100 rupees is too much for the one tablet for the people, what does government do? Government has legally, right, after the 20 years, they can copy, legal copy of a drug done after patent expires. Okay. Now, we need to understand what exactly, right, what exactly they are trying to tell us for the bioequivalence. Now, if you observe carefully the definition of the bioequivalence, it's written that two pharmaceutically equivalent compounds with similar rates, that means time taken for the absorption and extent of absorption, that means amount of drug absorbed, it is required for drug manufacturing companies. Now, say example, if this is the stomach, right? If this is the stomach, right? And I have taken the drug, right? Now I have taken the drug, right? I have taken the drug. Now what happens here is, now I have taken the drug of a branded drug. I have taken and it has absorbed, right? That is the time taken for the absorption, how much time it took for the absorption into the systemic circulation, and extent of absorption, amount of drug absorbed, how much time it took to absorb, and amount of drug absorbed, right? Now we're gonna compare it. Now, if you look into the normal range, 20% more or less of the branded drug, generic drug approval requires a bioequivalence certificate of minimum 20%, and we need to understand the benefit of the generic drug is that they are cheaper as they don't need research and development. Now what is it trying to tell us? Now let us compare the two drugs here, right? Let us compare the two drugs. Now this is a drug, okay? Now say example, if this is the drug, what actually happens in this drug is important. Now let me take let me take this, okay? Now, right, I have taken this drug. Now I've taken the drug, and out of 100%, say example, the time taken for the absorption, right, and the amount of absorption of this branded drug, if you compare that with the generic drug, if you compare that with generic drug, we need to understand the time taken for the absorption and the amount of absorption. The difference should be, suppose if it is of 80% is absorbed and it is around 60%, the difference between both is only 20%. So now you can make this as a generic drug. Suppose if the difference is more, right, the comparability of the generic drug with the branded drug, it is more than the 20%, then that is not acceptable. So it's written here that 20% or more or less of the branded drug, generic drug approval requires a bioequivalence certificate of minimum 20%. Okay, minimum 20%. Right now, benefit of generic drug is that they are cheaper. Right, if you look at 100 rupees, it may get it for 10 rupees or 20 rupees. And why the cost is less here? Because as they don't need research and development, they doesn't need again from the starting. Okay, the research from the starting they doesn't need. So that's the reason the cost of the drug has been decreased, right? So the points we need to understand here. But I have already the same thing written here also, right? The same thing written here. Company, once it invents a new drug, right, and it has a patent, once the patent is expired, the other companies legally copy the drug. Okay, they call that, once they copy the drug, they call that as a generic drug, right? Why? Because it's a cheaper drug. Okay, and approval required bioequivalence certificate. So what is bioequivalence? I have told you, two pharmaceutically equivalent compounds with a similar rate and extent of absorption. And what is the normal range? How much it should be? Of 20%, right? 20%. And that's all you need to understand. And that's all for this subtopic. Thank you.